Hi there. This video is going to be about why we decided to unenroll from the online public school that we were using and become official homeschoolers. So I'm going to walk you through the couple of top reasons that we decided to not stick with that original plan that we had. We enrolled in online public school last year with my kindergartner at that time. Now we have a first grader into kindergartner. So two kids in school. It was a little bit different, trying to be online for all of our lessons independently. They weren't doing anything collaboratively, so that made it a little bit hard. But honestly, the biggest reasons that we decided to switch were all things that came post-COVID. I think that they were trying to change a lot of the way that things looked to cater to families that wanted things to look more like their local public school. So it just wasn't fitting us. So I'm going to go through those couple of top things. Ultimately, I believe that any hoops anyone has to jump through with schooling should be justified by learning opportunities. And I do believe that they were last year. I don't believe that they were this year. So I'm going to let you know about a couple of those hoops that we had to jump through that I didn't feel were justified. For instance, last year when we had live lessons with our teachers, they were scheduled at a certain time, but they were not required. So they would record the video of the live lesson and post it so that if you wanted to see it later, you could. You didn't have to change everything about your own schedule to be online at a certain time. We didn't have to have webcams on. For instance, it wasn't required that you had your microphone on, so you could even have it on in the background if you really wanted to see if it was something that we should watch again later with your student. We did that occasionally. This year, you had to be on at a certain time. You had to have your webcam on and your microphone on, and every single live lesson that we attended for the first August, September, October, 3 months were assessments. So that was one live lesson per week. Really beginning in September. They didn't even do live lessons in August because of trying to figure out everything with crazy new levels of enrollment. For a couple of weeks, my son was in a kindergarten class of 150 students to one teacher. So they were frantically trying to hire new teachers, and that's no one's fault. It's just the way it was, but I believe that because they had so many new students and they didn't know what kind of experience they had before enrolling with this particular online public school, they were trying to figure out where everyone was at educationally. And they had to do a lot of assessments to do that, to kind of rank where people were so that the teachers could teach to the students that they had, which I do value. I understand that. But I know where my kids are at, and I was the primary responsible person for making sure that my kids achieved the education that was put in front of them. Because as the learning coach, I'm the one that's actually sitting next to them, completing the lessons together. So, for instance, for a math assessment during a live lesson, my kindergartner was supposed to count to 100, and he's in a live lesson with 6 other students at the same time. So we spent about an hour sitting here listening to each kid either count to 100 or not be able to count to 100, and then my son counts to 100 in 1 minute, something like that, rapidly. And I've already heard him do that 100 times because he knows how to count to 100. So we spent an hour of our lives listening to the world count to 100 or not successfully, and I already knew before we went into that lesson what my son's capabilities were. So it wasn't a huge value to us to sit through that live lesson with his teacher and prove to someone else that he knows how to do that when I, as his learning coach and primary educator, already knew that he could. So that was just one example. But for instance, we also decided to go camping this year. We took I think it was 3 days and 2 nights out of the middle of the week to go camping. And I called ahead to let the school know that we were going to be absent. Hi. And they let me know that I needed to still email the teachers and let them know, so I did. And then when we returned, we found that the absences were not going to be excused unless we had a valid reason for absence, which meant we had to submit a doctor's note for them to not get zeros as scores for the live lessons that they missed while they were gone. Because all the live lessons were graded assessments and not actually learning opportunities, which was definitely frustrating when I knew that my kids would have gotten 100s on the assessments. So it was affecting their grades at this point. Next, my daughter received 2 assignments graded at half credit. And when I walk you through what happened, I think you'll agree with me that was not justified. So one assessment was for math. It was a seating arrangement. It said that you have 15 guests arriving for a dinner party, obviously not during COVID, and you need to arrange them around these 2 rectangular tables. So basically use the fact family to show how many guests you're putting at this table plus how many guests you're putting at this table add up to 15. So she drew X's around the 2 rectangles on the worksheet. And then down at the bottom, she wrote the fact family. So she put 7 guests at the first table and 8 guests at the second table. So down at the bottom, she's writing 7 plus 8 equals 15, 8 plus 7 equals 15, 15 minus 8 equals 7, 15 minus 7 equals 8. So that's her fact family that she was displaying on her page. And it came back at half credit because 2 questions that were not on the worksheet, which were how did she know that 7 plus 8 equals 15, and how did she decide to put 7 at the first table and therefore 8 at the second table, were not answered because they were not on the worksheet. So that was frustrating. So I emailed the teacher back and let her know that she counted, and that's how she knew that added up to 15. But that I was here with her and helped her figure out what the assignment was, and we tried to answer all the questions on the assignment, and that's what we did. So half credit on that assignment did feel a little unfair. The second assessment that she got half credit for, give me a minute please, thank you, was an assignment where she was supposed to write a report about an animal that lived near a pond. So she chose to write the assignment about a frog, and we were supposed to do all of the steps of the writing process to get to that. So that was covered over multiple lessons. So the first lesson, she wrote the web of frogs in the center with different bubbles stemming off of that center bubble, covering all the different big facts that she wanted to put in her report. So then she was to write the draft and then edit the draft and revise it and then make her final draft and draw a picture to go with the final draft. And then it specifically said, submit your final draft. So that's what we did. And honestly, looking back, I feel like maybe I should have known to go ahead and submit more than what it asked for, because it was, the earlier lessons were about the writing process. But we didn't, because we submitted what it asked us to submit. And it came back at half credit because we hadn't submitted the earlier steps of the writing process. So at that point, the earlier steps had been thrown away because they weren't part of the submitted assessment. Having her do them again was not going to enhance her education, because she had already done it. It would have to be, if she did another web, it would have to be for the report that she already wrote and submitted. She couldn't just do another web to practice doing that writing skill, and so on with the draft and the editing and revising. So she'd have to write the draft incorrectly in order to show our editing and revising that we did, which didn't make sense educationally for the value that would be received from redoing those assignments. So I wrote back and let them know, I was here when she did all those things. The final draft exists because we did those earlier steps. So that's your evidence that they were done. But as the learning coach, I have no influence over the grade she receives for the assignment, which is frustrating when I'm the one that knows that it was done and done well. So it just became more and more evident that it wasn't fitting us well, and it was impacting grades in ways that didn't make sense or feel justified. So again, I just feel like the hoops that we're jumping through should be justified by the educational opportunity provided, and they weren't. So that's why we decided to unenroll, and I wanted to cover that because I know at some point I had let a lot of friends even know about what we were doing and how much we liked what we were doing. And I think I probably had some influence over people deciding to do that with their own families. And I wanted to let people know that a lot of it really was positive for us, and it was completely positive before this year. And some of those changes are what influenced us to decide to go a different direction this time. So I wanted to make sure that I covered the reasons for our decision to not stick to that. But if you have any other questions, I'd be glad to cover it. I'm not mentioning the name of the school just because there's no value. But I'm sure anyone who knows us very well knows what we were using. And it's really not any knock on them. It's just the way that it had to be done to serve the post-COVID rush that they had with enrollment, and it didn't fit us anymore. So we've gone this new direction, but I'm really excited about the way that we're going now, and I think we've finally kind of figured out where we're headed, and I think everyone's really happy with the decision. So let me know if you have questions, but that's why.